It's great to be here at the London Accessibility Forum. I used to live in London and I moved back to Scotland about 4 years ago, and I think that was round about the time that this started. So it's great to actually be here, and hopefully this will be the first of many visits to the forum. Because I think what you're all doing here is really the most powerful thing. It's coming together and actually consolidating messages and sharing information, and we can't really do enough of that in the community that we work in. So well done, Andy and everyone, for making this happen, and also to the sponsors. So I want to talk tonight a little bit about creating a platform for empathy. It was mentioned in the last session, I think a couple of times, that internal advocacy is a hugely powerful thing for all of us, and sometimes in big organisations that can be a real challenge to make that happen. So we have been lucky enough to be able to collaborate with what was the Transport Systems Catapult, the Connected Places Catapult, to create a tool which is called EYEWARE, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that and tell you a little bit about some of our experience in working with it, and also to get some thoughts as well. So before I do that, a little bit about myself. It's interesting how people's careers take interesting paths. I qualified as a careers advisor after I had done a social policy degree at Stirling University. I've spent 19 years working with people with disabilities in 34 countries around the world. I worked for an international NGO before coming to RNIB, and I literally was living out of a suitcase half of the year, just traveling and working all over Africa, South Asia, the Caribbean. So some of the things that I see in my current role, I kind of think the same problems and the same challenges are faced in lots of parts of the world. Sometimes the approaches are comparable and sometimes they're different. Born from the positivity pod, tell me that something can't be done and I'll find a way to make it work. This is true, right? So you can moan about problems or issues, or you can do something positive to fix them. That tends to be the way that I will do it. So when I told the people that I love most in life that I was going to be taking on a job working in hot countries, half the year traveling alone, they said to me, look, but have you forgotten that you've got this condition called albinism and it makes you really pale and susceptible to sunburn? Have you forgotten that? You're going to work in like 40 degrees heat. And have you forgotten that, you're visually impaired? No, I haven't. Love you to bits. Thank you so much for your kind of support. But hey, do you know what? I'm going, and I'm going to do it. Sometimes you have to push yourself in life out of your comfort zone. Speak internationally quite a lot, writer and consultant on diversity and inclusion issues. I'm a big fan of using technology, so that's one of the reasons why it's great to be here. Also a dad, husband, friend, gravel rider. Anyone do gravel riding here? Anyone cycle? Do you want to just say yes rather than raise your hand? Because the low vision guy on the bike can't see you. God, that's a scary thought, isn't it? I know you might not go out cycling at the weekend now. Don't worry, I'm a few hundred miles away. And I do tend to cycle behind someone else who can see perfectly well. But do you know what? When you're flying along at 30 miles an hour on gravel, it's pretty exhilarating. I wouldn't want to miss it just because of poor eyesight. There are ways of making yourself more visible. There are ways of using technology to help you understand the environment you're in. I love all that stuff. So tech evangelist, I think that's one of the things that I have acquired since being at RNIB. We work with all sorts of different brands, from small app studios to companies who produce household showers, to national cash registers, to supermarkets, banks, Samsung. I was quite lucky at the end of 2017. I got this phone call from Samsung and they said, look, you do some outdoor stuff. And I was doing some running at the time, still am occasionally. And they said, look, how do you fancy being nominated to carry the Olympic torch? And I thought it was a wind-up. So I had to check with the person in PR, and it wasn't. And about a week later, they rang me back and said, you're going to Busan in South Korea to carry the Olympic torch. So there it is there. Not sure about the torchbearer's uniform. I think it's a bit reminiscent of somebody that people don't want to talk about anymore these days. But you know, it was a fantastic experience, and just having a couple of minutes literally carrying the torch in a, you know, what is a historic event was really quite a moment. I also love my photography, so this is where I live, right opposite this island, which is on the Forth Estuary opposite Edinburgh, and that was about maybe 10 to 6 in the morning. There's something magical when the sun comes up. For us, those of us with low vision, it's an incredible time of day as well, because you don't get any problems with glare and too much brightness that you do later on in the day. So love taking pictures at kind of times of the day. This is the Union Canal, do a bit of canoeing as well. And that is actually taken above the busiest motorway in Scotland, the M8 motorway that connects Edinburgh and Glasgow. And it's a bit like serenity and calm above the chaos. It's quite special. Last picture, anyone know where that is? It's the Forth Rail Bridge. So it's the 8th wonder of the world. I do a bit of sailing, so I got the chance to go and just sail around it. And I had no idea what sort of structure it was until I got really close to it, because you don't see it well when you look at it from a distance. So for a lot of people with low vision, using photography and using images is a really helpful way of learning about what's going on around you. One last picture. I've got a 4-year-old on the way to nursery in the morning. He said to me, "Daddy, look, stop, look at that." And I said, "It's a bush." And he said, No, that." I said, "It's a leaf." And he said, "No, that." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Look at it." And I went up really close to it, and it's a ladybird, so I had to photograph it. But, you know, there's all these things going on around you and not necessarily happening to you in an accessible way. So photography, super powerful. Imagery, super powerful in explaining and helping us to understand. So RNIB is seeking a world where there are no barriers to people with sight loss. One of our purposes is that we're a catalyst for change. And kind of thinking about that, we do a lot of innovation work. Quite often we're referred to as the Victorian charity in Silicon Valley. And that's not connected with Victoria that Jan was talking about. But you know, it's thinking about a charity that grew up in a Victorian era, started by a guy who wanted to pursue people's desires to read and enable people to read. And today we're still very much about that, but about embracing technological change and also partnering with tech companies and innovators to enable greater inclusion for blind and partially sighted people, and also generating income through collaboration and facilitating the development of attractive, accessible products. So, do all sorts of consultancy, assessment and training with leading global brands, Google, Samsung, Amazon, Microsoft, etc. And that can be anything from a web accessibility audit. My colleague James is here tonight, who works in that area. It can be training for staff to help them to better understand. It can literally be anything. If you've got a £10 note in your pocket, this is not the moment where a Scotsman gets his money out. I don't have any, but if you've got a £10 note, it actually has accessibility features on it that we worked with the Bank of England to devise. And the science and the chemistry involved in actually creating accessibility marks on banknotes is pretty phenomenal. I had no idea how much was involved in doing that. You know, you would think you just make a couple of marks. There's so much to think about. How does that age? How is it stored? How is it dispensed? All those things. It was a real lesson in kind of polymer technology. So the World Blind Union is a global umbrella that brings together 191 organisations, a bit like RNIB. And we're very lucky because we were quite involved in World Blind Union. The Technology Committee, I vice chair with a guy at Utah University, Sachin Pavithran. And we've both got low vision, and we've kind of been pushing this agenda of let's think in a much broader way about the way in which we engage people and get them started in thinking, particularly in big organisations. And a good starting point is that an inclusive product is a desirable product, which empowers people and it avoids feelings of exclusion. So we kind of aggregated that from talking to lots and lots of people. Some of the companies that we've recently been working with, Bank of England, I mentioned, Samsung, Storm Interface, Apple Swift Playgrounds. We just created some materials to enable blind kids to be able to code using Swift Playgrounds. That was a recent Click piece covering that. And the kind of wonder of it, if you get to see it, is blind children in a school in South London, and they're basically controlling a parrot in the classroom, and they're getting it to do flips. A parrot drone, that is, not a parrot. I didn't need to clarify that for you guys. But it was amazing. You know, they're using Swift to basically get it to flip and to land and take off. EYEWARE, which is a really interesting concierge accessibility service that some of you may have come across. Absolutely fantastic service. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, please take a look. Sky, Royal Bank of Scotland, Microsoft, Scottish Power, Amazon, a whole range. And I mention those purely because there is no limit to the organisations that we will engage with. And people, you know, organisations in any arena we will engage and work with. So just mentioning a little bit about voice first technology, because we've been doing a lot of talking to people about this recently. So people of all ages and capabilities love voice first, a level playing field for people of all abilities, mainstream products that everyone can use, an enormous potential to be implemented beyond the current applications. We're thinking a lot about how we make some of our services accessible via voice first, workplace applications, layering it on top of other things that people might already be doing. I mean, one of the first things, if you think about using voice first and using something like a smart speaker, you know, one of the first interactions I had with that was using Skyscanner. Now imagine going to the website, Skyscanner, and entering in everything that you need to put in, and then try it using a voice first interaction. I think that's kind of quite an interesting example. So EYEWARE, if you're interested in downloading this, you can go to the App Store or the Play Store. It may temporarily be missing from the Play Store. It will be back very soon. It's EYEWARE. Where this really came from was that we're working with the Transport Systems Catapult, who were really looking at where's the UK going to be, where does the UK want to be in terms of intelligent mobility over the next 10 years. And that would include everything from autonomous vehicles, you know, self-guided transport systems, pods, innovative ways of getting around last mile solutions. But we discovered that they had a lot of technology available to them that could allow them to create things that would be really helpful, not just for the work that they were doing, but also from the point of view of inclusion and inclusive design. So we kind of began this conversation about, you know, RNIB for a long, long time has used something called SimSpecs. Has anyone used SimSpecs? Yeah? Yep, cool. So they can be rigid plastic, or some of them are kind of card and plastic. But basically what they do is allow you to create a simulation. So you could simulate something like cataract, or diabetic retinopathy, or macular degeneration, or retinitis pigmentosa, any of the commonest eye conditions that we would quite often come across when we meet people who come to see RNIB. But the issue with that is that it's static. You put it on, right, and you take it off, and you've got a sense of maybe what kind of practical barriers someone might experience. But do you know what? You've just got the choice to take it off. I wear spectacles, and all that they do is they darken down when I'm outside, and they mean that glare doesn't too negatively impact me. And they're kind of like a bit of a style statement as well, aren't they? But they've also, maybe not, they've got a little magnet on the right-hand leg, and someone was saying to me, you know, what is that about? And I said, I'm watching you. They get a bit worried. I'm actually not. That's purely plastic with a couple of ties and a magnet. But what it does is it allows me to place a small assistive device onto the leg of the spectacles, and it magnetically clips into place. And what that device will do is it will look around me, and if it spots someone that I know who's in my contacts, and they come into view of the device, it'll say Andy Ronksley, right? And then the next time it sees him, it'll say it again. And I have to just tell the device that person's name so that it can associate their image with their name. So that's quite clever. But it'll also do things like I can point at a display board in an exhibition, and it will start reading what is on that board. That's really helpful. There's a number of assistive technologies will do that, but that's why I've got that little clamp on there. But what we wanted to do was think about, well, how can you use augmented reality? How could you use something like a cardboard viewer? So a simple, VR cardboard viewer that you would pick up at a PC World or wherever. How could you use that with your phone to enable you to do a kind of better type of simulation? How could that be something that kind of was bigger than SimSpecs? And also SimSpecs are quite expensive. If you have to buy a set of SimSpecs, it's about 120 quid to buy the box. And it comes in a great big case that you would have to bung on the overhead rack in the train. That's terribly old school. No one wants to be carrying that around with them. So if you could have it on your phone, that would be a whole lot easier. So that's kind of where we came from. Blindness and visual impairment are kind of among the most feared disabilities. So routinely, there are surveys carried out where people are told, they're asked, what would you fear most in terms of a health condition or disability? And blindness, not surprisingly, blindness and visual impairment are very near the top of that ladder. Okay, and it's consistent. It's always in the top 3. And that's a lot to do with the fact that we live in a very visual world, and wherever you go, all the time that you're awake, people are absorbing or attempting to absorb visual information. So if you lose a lot of your sight, you have to adjust in all sorts of ways. It's a bit different for me because I was born with a condition that basically means that I can see the top letter on the eye test chart. I can see that there are 2 letters beneath it, but I can't see them well enough to tell you what they are. I used to guess as a kid, and then I learned that was a pretty stupid thing to do, so I stopped doing it. But basically the rationale there is that I have no sense of loss or deficit. What I can see, the vision that I've got, is entirely normal to me. So I've just adapted as I've gone through life. That's why I'm doing stupid things like gravel riding and jumping out of planes. And also because it pushes you out of your comfort zone. But if you've lost your sight, that probably is a bigger transition because you've done everything in a highly visual way. We work with people who have been, makeup artists, or they've worked in film and they've lost their vision. Now, can you imagine if you're doing a highly visual job and you lose a big part of your eyesight or you lose your sight altogether? That pretty much changes the way that you do everything. And we wanted to try and capture some of that. So often people struggle to understand the impacts. Traditional simulation is typically static and it does not convey gradients and fluctuations. So by that I mean that if you have a condition like diabetic retinopathy, it's not the same on Tuesday as it is on Thursday or Wednesday afternoon or Friday morning or Sunday night. People find the condition fluctuates as their stress levels change, as other health aspects change. They find that what they're able to see, alters. And you can imagine trying to explain that to the people in your office. If you could see something maybe quite well on Tuesday, on Wednesday it was a bit harder, very difficult for people to understand that. But when you give them a simulation, all of a sudden that sort of thing starts to become a lot more crystallized, a lot clearer. So EYEWARE is really intended to be another tool alongside narrative and personal storytelling. It's never going to be used as an alternative to those things because the most powerful thing is storytelling and personal narrative, and that really puts a lot of things into context. But if you've only got 3 minutes with the CEO, and I had an occasion recently where I had 3 minutes with the CEO of a big company, and you might be thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to talk about? What might I miss out? What am I not going to cover? And you could be a bit anxious about that. Or you could just ask them the question, you know, this morning, have you sent a WhatsApp message? If you go into any group and you ask that question at a training event, almost everyone puts their hand up. I can't see their hand going up. So I just say, look, can you say yes? And they all say yes. So who here has sent a WhatsApp message today? Yes. Yep, so lots of people. And you find that everywhere. So, you know, you could ask them something like that, or you could talk about who's going to be going into a shop later today to buy anything. And almost everybody will be doing that, whether it's an online shop or a physical shop. They'll be going to do that. Or they might even just be going to buy fuel for their car or recharge their car or whatever. But they're going to do something that's a visual job. So if you can put them in that position, and then you can introduce them to what might happen if you didn't have the amount of eyesight that you currently have. And you can visually show them that. You can show them in EYEWARE the condition early onset. You can show them at kind of moderate and a more severe progression of any of those common conditions. And that has been the kind of catalyst for many light bulb moments in using it in our advocacy. And I think, you know, that's the one thing that genuinely becomes the springboard for change. The light bulb moment becomes the springboard for change. Whatever industry you go to, that is true. If you can get an inspirational, charismatic leader to reach that light bulb moment, that's when things start to happen. You know, you hear people saying things like, oh, we've no budget for this, there isn't a budget for that. That's all relative. It's all relative. There's a budget for lots of different things. It's all about how it's badged. You know, we've seen examples of where there is no budget, and we've used this tool, and all of a sudden, there's like £50,000 to invest in inclusive design or accessibility because it's been deemed to be more important than it was previously understood to be. So a transition has taken place. People have gone from understanding accessibility as being over here to understanding it as being right here, front and center for every single business strand in their company. And when you can make that happen, that's when you get that light bulb moment. And I might be talking here about the perspective of visual impairment. This actually is helpful because although we're focusing people on visual impairment, we're encouraging and we're assisting companies to work with frameworks that are pan-disability. So WCAG or the public sector equality duty, well, whatever it is, it's pan-disability. We're just coming from an organisation that's got a particular standpoint, but we're doing that taking into account the needs of others as well. Some of the challenges that we've experienced with it as well, creating a tool which is currently not fully accessible. That's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, this is the guy from the RNIB telling you this. Why did we do that? So there is no accessibility framework for the VR engine in Android or iOS. Currently that's not available. But if we said, right, okay, because that's not available, we'll not bother creating anything, it doesn't move the agenda forward. So, you know, this kind of creates another urgency because people look at it and they rightly say, well, I can't have voiceover support with that app. That's true. That's currently not possible. Hopefully it will be one day. And actually to get to that point where we increase understanding and we have accessibility with it, we need to go on a journey and we've got to bring people with us on that. And that's been a challenge for us to actually say to some people, you know, I mean, as one of the originators, I didn't code this app, but I worked very, very closely with the people who did, and I was responsible for a lot of the kind of comms content that went into it, the eye conditions in some cases, checking the kind of authenticity of the filters, a whole bunch of stuff. But, you know, as one of the originators who is visually impaired, actually saying, look, the reason we're doing this, we're doing it with conviction because we want to change people's attitudes, we want to change people's mindsets, move them closer towards that more holistic way of thinking about inclusive design. And that's when the magic will begin to happen, when people get to that point. So moving people's thinking forward has been a big step, getting people away from sim specs. There are occasions where sim specs will work better than EYEWARE. So I recently went to a flower show. We had a stall at the Hampton Court Flower Show because we'd worked with a garden designer. I said that we did everything from showers and cash machines and apps and websites, doing gardens as well. We did a work with a garden designer to design a sensory garden, and we wanted to basically use simulation, and it was super bright outside. So actually using SimSpecs worked a bit better on that occasion. But indoors, typically it'll be a better option. But it's also about enabling change and an organizational mind shift. That's a really hard thing to do. It's a really tough thing to do. I remember being in Microsoft in Seattle 5 years ago, and some very senior people in Microsoft said, "What do you reckon we should do? Where should we go?" And I said, what you should do is you start creating accessibility apps for the iPhone. And I thought one of them was going to throw their Surface Book at me. What did they go away and do? They started creating apps for the iPhone. Accessibility apps for the iPhone. That makes a hell of a lot of sense. And actually, those apps, in some cases, have gone on to win awards. Seeing AI, Soundscape, others that are coming. So, you've got stuff built for a particular platform, but where you can capture an audience and you can extend understanding, that's when you can actually make kind of great things happen. Some of the opportunities, very briefly before I wrap up: accessibility framework for VR and AR and iOS and Android. Collaboration with others in this space. So we're not doing this in a vacuum. We're talking to a lot of other people who are doing similar things, and we'd love to do more. We've got a whole bunch of ideas as to how we could kind of make it better, stronger, richer, faster, more engaging. And that's where we want to go. It's a journey rather than being an end point. And even getting that across to the community we work with and some of our colleagues has been a challenge. This app arriving, that's the beginning, it's not the end. So layering of voice, images, video, and text, how can we kind of make all of that happen in a really positive way? Very, very briefly, kind of 3 challenges are ahead. So artificial intelligence and computer vision already changing the landscape for our community. We've seen what 5G will radically do in terms of changing connectivity, and the Internet of Things changing the way that people experience all sorts of services, greatly enhancing kind of accessibility in the workplace. So this is one tool in a whole framework of different connected opportunities. And we think that the use case that people have for it currently, will be different from what they have in a year's time. It's all about collaboration. It's all about bringing ideas together and getting closer towards that light bulb moment. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Robin. Any questions? From the audience? I have one. Can you do anything with EYEWARE without the cardboard viewer, or do you definitely need
You can, yes. Yeah. So that's a great question. If you use EYEWARE without the cardboard viewer, what you have to do is download the app, and when you open the app, hit Simulator, and basically just use one tap of your finger anywhere on the screen, and that will bring up a menu of buttons. The tricky bit, and I said that actually demoing it and showing it as someone with low vision can be tricky, is that you'll spot a tiny red dot on screen once you've tapped the screen once and you've seen those buttons appear. And what you need to do is tilt your phone backwards and forwards, side to side, to get the red dot on top of the condition name that you would like to simulate. So you can do all of that without the cardboard viewer. And actually, when we're training people in how to use it, we tend to show them it without the cardboard viewer, purely because it's much easier to have an interactive demonstration doing that. But do download it, try it out, let us know what you think. And we'd love to hear if people have ideas and thoughts about how it can kind of go further. It's a journey, we're at the beginning of it, but we're really excited about what potentially we could do.
Could you use the mic? Your mic is
sure. Yeah, this is better, isn't it? We're super excited about collaborating with other people and basically making it work, across the platforms, but maybe even also extending it into other disabilities, because we want to show people, of course, what a visual impairment simulation might be like. And that's worth clarifying. You know, we can't fully simulate blindness or visual impairment, but we can give people a practical insight into some of the everyday obstacles that someone might encounter. And that's how we kind of nudge a little closer to the light bulb moments.
Cool.
Any other questions? Everyone's tired now, aren't they? They want to get home. Thinking about trains and pubs.
Yep, there's one over there.
Yeah.
I'll take it off.
That mic is off.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Do you want that one?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, great talk, thank you. I was just wondering, what's a good way of using EYEWARE to get buy-in from people around the business? I've tried doing it with the specs and getting to view websites and stuff like that.
Sorry, can you say that again? Sorry, I missed a bit.
I'm just trying to use EYEWARE as a persuasion tool for people to buy into accessibility and stuff. I've kind of used it as getting people to use websites and stuff while wearing the Google thing. But is that a good way of doing it, or is there any other ways?
You could do that. So you could give people a cardboard and you could get them to try and access a site. The other thing that we've done is we've created a kind of training session, which we call Digital Access Needs and Customer Experience, and it gets shortened to DANCE. And what that does is basically, we've done it with Sky and Scottish Power and a couple of other companies, but we're basically running a session where we use EYEWARE as the training vehicle. So that's another option, is to actually use it as part of a structured session. And in doing that, we do some tasks with it, but we also do a lot of scenario planning where we look at it on screen and then we do some group-based activities. So by all means, please do get in touch if you want to kind of pick up on that one. But yeah, I think embedding it into a broader training activity is a really good way to do it. Or to work with a decision maker, you know, if you get time with the CEO, get it on their radar, but just getting them to try out the cardboard with the phone in it with a condition, and maybe just go for a walk around the building with them, for example, or go into your website or look at your app, for example. Any of those things would be potentially really good use of it.
Brilliant, thank you.
Any others? Yep.
You mentioned the Microsoft apps, accessible apps. You mentioned they should make them. Were they apps had accessibility baked into them, or were they particular apps that were for to make differently able people? Yeah.
Yeah. So in the case of Microsoft, essentially what we were saying to them at the time was, hasn't the world changed incredibly fast? Microsoft. Some people will remember when Microsoft used to ship disks inside boxes, and you used to do an upgrade to Windows 7, or Vista. Remember that? Anyone remember Vista? That wasn't a great
want to
release,
forget it,
was
really. Yeah.
So basically that was the way that people thought about Microsoft, and it's obviously moved now towards what they like to call an evergreen product, where it's constantly updating, by the week. And what we'd said is that the world around accessibility has changed really fast. We've seen lots and lots of disabled users, and in particular, visually impaired users gravitating towards iOS for really solid reasons. And therefore, there was a big community of disabled users who were using iOS that, if a company that makes software were to create exemplar applications, that would be a really good platform to create them for. So that kind of begun a whole accessibility initiative around apps. And some of that has, filtered into some of Microsoft's own apps, for example. So things like, Outlook and Skype for Business, and the whole family of Microsoft apps. There's now quite a big effort underway inside Microsoft to have a bigger focus on accessibility, and that's been a lot about leadership as well. So we kind of tried to get engagement with Microsoft in the days of Steve Ballmer, and it never really got anywhere. When Satya Nadella came on board, he is a person who has direct experience of, he has people with disabilities in his family, so it's an incredibly important thing for him personally as a leader to be infusing the culture of accessibility inside Microsoft and to be enthusing other people. So that's helpful. I think wherever there's a passionate leader who believes strongly in accessibility, that's a tremendously powerful message. It's a bit like, you know, the kind of famous Tim Cook stuff about a shareholder asking how much it costs Apple to do accessibility. And Tim Cook's response is basically, if you want to know how much this costs, you know, you should probably sell your stock. It sends out a really powerful message when you've got charismatic leaders. And that's why using this tool, if that's just to get at a director in the company and get them on board and bring them along, make it something that they can then tell other people about. And then you begin to cascade that enthusiasm and that knowledge. And if you were able to show them EYEWARE, but you were also able to show them, for example, what an application may have looked like before accessibility was taken into consideration, and then show them what it looks like afterwards, that's powerful as well. And that might even be thinking about really simple visual things like having a dark theme or a high contrast mode or bold fonts and bold keyboard and larger text, just seeing how much easier it is for everybody to read and to access, as well as the people that it's intended to help.
Cool, thank you. Any more?
Thanks.
Okay. I think
But if
we're
anyone wants to
good.
chat further, I'm on Twitter. It's just at robinspinks. And yeah, thanks very much, guys, for all your questions and for listening. It's been a blast. Hope to come back.
Cool. Thank you, Robin.